Almost every runner out there is sabotaging their interval training, and because of it, they're on a plateau. It doesn't matter what they try, they simply can't get faster.
But here's the thing, once you know what's going wrong, the fix is simple and it can completely change your results.
Exactly. So today we're going to share with you the 6 mistakes that most runners are making when it comes to their interval training and how to fix it. Ready, Shona? Let's dive straight into it. What is the biggest thing that's holding most runners back?
Interestingly, Brad, it's that most runners are running their easy runs too hard. And the reason for this is what happens is when you run your easy runs too hard, you're pushing yourself a little bit harder, a little bit heavier, which means you're not able to recover quick enough in time for your harder runs. So essentially, you don't have enough capacity in order to do your harder runs. And so how this works, essentially when we're training for any kind of endurance running events, we have 2 energy systems that we're predominantly training for: the aerobic system and the anaerobic system. Our easy runs are focusing on the aerobic system, and our interval runs are essentially focusing on the anaerobic system. When we're running nice and easy, we are able to run slightly harder, or even on the slower end or easier end of that range, we are still getting the same benefits physiologically. Everything is still happening, but you're putting your body under a little bit more stress and load, which means then if you're doing those easy runs a little bit too hard, you don't have the capacity to do your hard runs as hard as you need to. You're just giving yourself a little bit less capacity every single time.
Okay, cool, Shona. So it's not about hitting every session as hard as you can all the time.
Yeah, exactly, Brad. Think about like revving your car engine, and you're constantly revving it all the time, and by the time you actually want to drive, you have nothing left in the tank.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so step 1 is making sure that you don't run hard all the time. Let's talk about the actual intervals, and actually when it does come time to run them hard, what I see often is a lot of runners go out like a bat out of hell, shot out of a cannon for their first interval, and then just really fade and they really struggle for the last couple. Is that the next big mistake?
Definitely. The goal with our intervals is to try and run all the repetitions at a hard but equal sustained effort. So you don't want to start out really, really hard and then die a slow death with each repetition. You also equally don't want to start too slow and then get faster and faster with each repetition. If you're doing X number of reps, you want all of those repetitions to be done at a hard, sustained effort. You want to be able to sustain all of those repetitions, but here's the key as well, is that they're not maximal reps. They are hard repetitions.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like the Fast and the Furious movies where you don't want to blow your budget in the first car chase because the rest of the movie will be terrible. I'm guessing that's exactly it.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Brad. You want to start strong and be consistent all the way through.
All right, cool. That makes a lot of sense. But what about rest? I feel that a lot of runners make this mistake, and I do too, is we kind of just wing it what happens between intervals. What's the deal with rest between these interval sessions?
The key thing there, Brad, is that runners think that rest it's just your break. But the rest is really the integral part of our intervals. We manipulate the rest in order to elicit a certain response. So you really have to think not about the running part as it is the important part, but it's not the element that's changing what we're trying to elicit physiologically from these intervals. When we're working with different rest intervals, we are trying to get either speed or power or speed endurance, and we manipulate those rest intervals accordingly. As an example, if we are working on pure speed, the rest interval is much longer. If we're working more towards speed endurance, we have slightly shorter rest intervals.
All right, that makes a ton of sense, Shona. I've also heard that some runners do their intervals on an empty stomach. What's the deal with fueling for these interval sessions?
Well, here's the thing, Brad. You wouldn't drive your car on an empty tank. You're not going to leave for your vacation and not put fuel in your car. And the same thing goes for these sessions. You want to give your body the energy that it needs to really hit these intervals and these times well. If you don't fuel for these sessions, what's going to happen is that you just deplete your energy stores more and more and more. And then if you don't put back in after the session, you're never going to recover well as well. And lastly, what's really key is that the body will always find a way. So if you are pushing it and you haven't given it its energy source, it's going to take it from somewhere else. And that's more than likely a liver glycogen or a muscle glycogen. So we want to give it an exogenous source, a source from outside that it doesn't have to deplete from our stores already.
So sticking with the fuel tank analogy, no fuel, no performance. That's what it boils down to.
Exactly, Brad. I'm not sure how happy Lewis Hamilton will be if he's driving his F1 car on fumes.
Yeah, it's so true. The next one that I see quite often is when we talk about hill intervals. And I see some runners running up some crazy steep hills. Shona, the steeper the better. Is that the way it works?
No, definitely not. Ideally, we want to have a gradient of around 3 to 5%. Steeper than that, we're really putting ourselves at a risk of injury. The force that is on your Achilles, the angle at which your foot now has to drive yourself up there, puts a bigger force on your Achilles and puts you at risk of injury. The other thing is that we're trying to generate a lot of force or power in those sessions. And the steeper it is, you're not going to be able to generate as much force because it's just way too steep. So if we bring that gradient down a little bit, you allow yourself to be able to create more force going up the hill, which is really what we're trying to elicit in those sessions.
Okay, so we've spoken about hills now. Let's talk about speed, out and out speed intervals. I'm guessing, Shona, the flatter the better.
Yeah, exactly, Brad, because now when we're hills, we're trying to build power and strength. Here we are trying to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible. So we're trying to get a high leg turnover. So ideally, we want to get a little bit more pace in those sessions, and so the flatter the better. We want those to, if you're doing this on a treadmill, you'll set your treadmill to 0%. Obviously, if you're on a track, that would be ideal. If you're doing it on the road, try and find a flatter route as possible. And again, here the goal is high leg turnover, not necessarily a maximal effort, but just really getting those legs turning over so that we're recruiting as many muscle fibers as we can.
So basically, you don't want to be like Rocky and running upstairs if you're training for pure speed.
Exactly. Leave the movie moments for the movies and focus on the right terrain for your goals.
Okay, so now that you know this, you're already ahead of the game. But if you want to take your interval training to the next level, watch this video next to check out our just-in-time interval system. It might just be the upgrade you need to take your running to the next level.